Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Feel free to leave a comment saying where you're joining us from in the comments. I'm Courtney Burt Reed, coming to you live from Massachusetts. I'm the digital marketing manager here at MIT Sloan Executive Education. Thank you so much for taking the time today to tune into our LinkedIn Live event. We're going to be talking about the MIT Advanced Management Program, or as we like to call it, AMP or AMP. It's a month-long in-person course in the MIT campus happening this summer, May 27th to June 26th, 2025. And honestly, that's the best time of year to come to Kendall Square. Trust me. In this event, you're going to hear from alumna, faculty, and a director. We have them here today. And I'll let them introduce themselves in depth, but then we'll chat about the AMP experience as a whole. So please have your questions ready in the comments. If you leave your questions, we'll do our best to address them. And if we can't get to all of your questions in a timely manner, please feel free to send us an email as well. We're going to be recording today's session, so it will live here on our LinkedIn company page, but we're also going to email everyone who registered with the recording link and more information about AMP. In case you have to drop or you couldn't make it, you might see this recording link in your inbox. Without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Court Chilton, MIT Senior Lecturer and AMP Faculty Director, to introduce himself and get things started. So Court, take things away.
All right, Court, thank you for that. It's rare to get two Courts on live. It's always wonderful to do this with you. Again, I've been at MIT for about 14, 15 years, and I helped build the current version of the AMP, as we call it. And I'm glad to connect with all of you that are interested in this topic. What we're going to do is I have a few slides to share, and then we're hoping just to have a conversation between Kriti, who's an alumna, and Molly and me, and then you through the chat. So if you have questions, if you want to put your location in the chat and then pose your question, we'll be watching that and make sure we try to get to as many of those as we can. So that's a picture of the MIT Dome, which was the first building of MIT when it moved to its current location. That's more of a fall picture. Right now it has some snow around it, but let's go to the next slide, and hopefully I can drive this a little bit. Maybe I might need your help there, Courtney, to go to the next. There we go. So let me just say quickly what our purpose is today and what the agenda is. We want to just do a little bit of orientation to MIT and to what the Advanced Management Program is and answer your questions. And the way we're going to do that is you see in number 3 there is I'll just do a brief overview of MIT and Sloan, what we're in business to do. I'll talk a little bit about the objectives of the AMP. And then I'll introduce you to Kriti, who's an alumna just from this past June. And that's where the conversation will really begin. We have some backup other slides to show you if it comes up, but mostly it's going to be me with a few slides to begin and then a conversation with Kriti. So let's dive right into MIT. Some of you, there's a lot of people that know of MIT. So this is just a little bit more detail because sometimes there is unsupported brand awareness. So the first block of type that you see there is the MIT mission to advance knowledge and educate in science, technology, and other areas of scholarship. And what you may not know is that MIT was founded in 1861 before the Industrial Revolution. So they didn't know about management in those days. And so management at that time fell into other areas of scholarship. But then we began building management programs as the world got more complicated and organizations got bigger. In the 1910s, 1920s, there were management courses that you could take at MIT. And then that built up until the 50s when Alfred P. Sloan was running General Motors and saying, the world is so complicated. I have all these brands, all these supply chains operating in many countries. There must be a way to help me deal with this complexity. And that's when he gave them the money to help start up the Sloan School. So more than a program or a set of courses, it was an actual school. And today that's one of the 6 schools as part of MIT. And our mission is in the lower right there to develop principled, innovative leaders who improve the world. And so the people that come to the AMP are part of our mission, very close to our hearts. What you see over on the left is the MIT motto, and we also use that at Sloan, mens et manus, mind and hand. We began as an engineering school, and we kind of teach business and management with an engineering way, and that it's super practical, hands-on. Let's solve problems together. So this mind and hand idea informs pretty much everything that we do in and around the classroom. So that's MIT and a little bit about Sloan. I'll talk just for a little bit longer about the AMP, the purpose of the AMP, and who comes. So the overall objective of this 5 weeks back-to-back program, it's every June, starts just after Memorial Day here in the US, late May, and goes till the end of June. And it's people live here and go to the program. The purpose is to provide an intimate, transformative learning experience, as it says there on the slide, for people who are in the middle of their careers. So think mid-30s to, we have people that are as old as 65 in the program. What do they have in common? They all want to not just take individual pieces together, they want an overall integrated experience, and they want to work on themselves. Many of them are in the C-suite or just below the C-suite. Sometimes they're running entrepreneurial companies. And so we want to give them, as it says there in number 1, develop skills and frameworks that are useful to people who are operating at that level of complexity. And we want to connect the people that are in the program to each other. They come from all over the world, as you'll see in a second. And then we want to get them out into the ecosystem around MIT, which is really vibrant, lively, lots of new businesses forming all the time. Lots of big companies are here also to partner up with those startup companies. And so it's just, we want to get you in the classroom, but also get you outside of the classroom. So that's our general purpose, is to do these things that you see on the screen. Here's who comes, and I'll show you a chart in a second, and then I'll stop talking. The average years of work experience is about 15 to 20. That's kind of a loose guideline for us. The key thing is that we want to see people in the room who've had lots of different functional experiences, or who've worked across functions, worked across geographies. Basically, the idea is that they've dealt with some complexity. So they need to have experienced that, not thought about it, not heard other people talk about it, but actually have had to deal with it themselves so they can be helpful to other people in the room. We need people who can speak good written and who can speak great English, and who are comfortable writing in English. It's helpful to have a lot of international exposure, and they may come with a particular issue or initiative they're trying to get done inside their company, and they come to work on that. They come to work on strategy. They come to work on digitalization or AI implementation. It could be almost anything, but something that's cross-cutting of the whole company. And these people generally want to learn for themselves, but they also want to contribute to other people's learning. And they want to develop themselves as leaders. They know that what got them to the point where they are now in their career is good, but may not be what they need to be doing in order to be even more successful in the future. So that's the profile. It's a little bit about demographics, but also psychographics. What's going on in their mind? Why do they choose this? And we'll hear Kriti in a moment talk about that. One last slide, just so you can see, I think, some data here. The chart on the left, the pie chart, shows people where they come from all over the world. Most of the people come from outside North America. So it's a very global feeling program. They come from many different sectors, not just math and technology type of sectors, which is many people's assumption. We get people from travel industry, construction, retail, finance, all different sectors and all different functions. So in the same room, marketing people, finance people, operations people, and what they all are working on are these C-suite level issues that they all can play a role in pushing forward at their company. So that's who comes at a very high level. And what we'd like to do in this is just give you a flavor for just talking live to someone who has been through the program. And so that's why we're really glad today to have Kriti joining us here on the screen. She went through the program just in the last iteration this past June. So she's been out of the program for a little over 6 months, and has a new job today that she didn't know she was going to have before she started. But we'll get to that in a little while. What I'm hoping she'll do is just tell you what she was doing before she applied to the AMP, and then a little bit about why she began thinking about doing something like an AMP. So Kriti, maybe you could comment about that, and then we'll talk a little bit with Molly and you.
Yeah, sure. So before we get into me professionally, a little bit about me personally. So I'm based in the Boston area, so not too far from MIT. I have a daughter whose name is Nana. She's almost 4. Hopefully she won't break into this room. We'll find out together in the next hour. And I have a dog, Simba, who just turned 6 today. And then my husband, Kunal, who works in surgical robotics and is an engineer. I am not. We'll talk about that. My professional background prior to AMP, I spent the first half of my career as a marketing leader and brand management at Procter & Gamble, ran the Mr. Clean business in North America for a while, ran premium Gillette shaving category as well, also built out their direct-to-consumer and e-commerce business as a general manager. That was sort of my first taste of technology as a marketing leader. And so I then pivoted where I was when I applied to AMP, prior to AMP, to Toast. I joined fairly early. It's a restaurant technology platform, vertical platform. So it's everywhere from software as a service, hardware, fintech, really a little bit of everything, anything you'd interact with technology with the restaurants. I joined as their first product marketer focused on consumer technology, built out that product marketing team, department, portfolio through the pandemic with the restaurant mandates, and then also post IPO. And where I was prior to AMP was actually had moved to a new role, really founding their customer experience strategy, operations, and experimentation team. And so that was sort of where I left off prior to my experience this summer.
Right. And so while you're working at Toast, you thought maybe I need to do something. What was in your mind about looking for something it's a pretty significant investment of time. What made you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I'll be honest, initially it was very tactical. So I hit my 5 years of service and we actually get a paid sabbatical that happened to align with the same window as this program. And so initially it was sort of this wake up call of, well, how do I want to use that time? But I think behind that, I would say, Court, there were really 2 nagging questions for me when I was thinking broadly about an advanced management program. So even before I chose to come to Sloan. One was, I think parents on the line, I imagine, can relate. I really wanted to think deeply about where I spend my time and energy once I became a mom. And, I loved where I worked and building out my time there, but I had solved so many interesting problems in hospitality space. And I wanted to think about, well, what problem do I want to solve next? What impact do I want to leave? And some of the questions I had were enterprise challenges from Toast, but a lot of them were really the last thing that Court touched on, individual. So what did I want to work on as a leader? And I think parallel to that, the more personal aspect was I experienced a really severe mental illness when I became a mom. And so I had this kind of nagging thought when I was eventually well, that I wanted to find a way to get involved in healthcare, which I had never been in healthcare, and really deeply think about what role do I want to play to tackle the maternal mental health crisis in the United States. From razors to restaurants to pregnant and postpartum women was sort of top of mind. And I remember in my interview telling Molly, like, I don't really know what to do with this thought. It's sort of like a thought of mine. I don't even know if it's passion or paycheck. Just know that like I have a lot of these Toast things I'm thinking about, like enterprise challenges as a customer experience executive. But I also in the back of my mind have been thinking about, oh, what role do I want to play really in this crisis and in healthcare? And so really the time and energy question, and then sort of the more macro existential, what role do I want to play to tackle a really complex crisis, were what motivated me to say, I can't answer these questions if I'm tied to a position of power or paycheck in a moment, because ultimately I'm focused on my KPIs, my outcomes. I really needed to be in a different environment with the cognitive diversity and frankly, other diversity that you get in a classroom from both peers and professors to really crack at both those questions.
Yeah.
And
cool.
what would you say drew you to MIT?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll be honest, I was a sociology major who did theater. And so I don't know that I initially envisioned myself at Sloan. Like, I think I had a lot of, frankly, assumptions about who would be at an AMP program at Sloan. And I think, there were three things that really drew me to it in the end. And I was considering, another 6-week program, but really ultimately that made me choose this one. First and foremost, the candidate experience. So I'm not just saying this because Molly and Court are on the line. I firmly believe that the candidate experience for anyone out there looking at any program is reflective of the classroom experience. And I think in both the application process and the thoughtful questions that were in the interview, it was very clear to me that, this design of a smaller cohort was very intentional. And not only were Court and Molly and Alex and team taking a lot of feedback from previous cohorts to continue to refine their own curriculum, which was something they talked about, but they were very interested in both my individual goals and my enterprise goals, and really looking to personalize the experience and be thoughtful about who they wanted in their cohort. To be very frank, one of my fears was I'm just going to give a lot of my money and time to one of these programs, and I'll just get a certificate at the end that I'll post on LinkedIn. That was one of my fears. And it was very clear from the candidate experience, but this was not that. This was really about a transformative experience that would up-level me as a leader. And so I think that was kind of one aspect. I think the other aspect is what Court touched on. So the applied learning, menos y manos, I love the idea of I'm not going to just archive a case study, that I'll forget 6 months from now. I truly, because you practice while you're there, you kind of build that habit. I don't know if anyone here knows Atomic Habits, but it's almost like you're building those habits while you're in the classroom such that you can continue to apply them even beyond the AMP experience. So that was probably the second aspect. And then the third is a very personal one. As a young toddler mom, it was scary to say, I'm going to take even a month away from my child. And I'm not in a place, I remember someone was like, well, take a 20-month EMBA and work part-time on nights and weekends. And I was like, that's not going to work for me and my family. And I didn't want to, frankly, be out of a paid job for that long as well. And so I think for me, it was very clear that the syllabus and curriculum was designed such that you had the space to step back, whether that's to absorb learnings, whether that's my peer set that's like, let's go run races in Boston, let's go explore Cape Cod, or whether that's, I just want to get my daughter ready for school or enjoy dinner with her without worrying about the case study. And it actually gives you time to absorb the learnings versus kind of running around like a chicken with your head cut off. So I would say, again, to summarize, was really the candidate experience and the really intimate cohort experience, menos y manos, and then finally the really feeling like this program would fit into my life and my family life versus me having to really take a step back from that altogether.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Kriti. I just want to pause. Maybe Molly, you have another question, but I'm just noticing some people saying hello from all different parts of the world, which is great. And then if you have any questions, anyone who's listening, please put that into the comments in the chat section, and we'll try to get to that. One other thing I'm thinking might be helpful is maybe we could post a link to the course website so that if people have detailed questions about, well, do you cover this or do you do that? You can get some of those questions answered while you're listening to Kriti and I and Molly talk about the program. Molly, did you want to come back with another question about?
Yeah, there were a couple of things you mentioned.
Assumptions about what would happen here. Anything you wanted to say about Kriti coming into the experience?
Yes. If I can jump in, you specifically mentioned you had expectations about who might be drawn to a program like this and what the cohort might look like. Did that meet your expectations?
I mean, exceeded it, right? It's why I'm here and spending this time with all of you. I think, I'll be honest, I was nervous that it would be a room of all older men and all engineers, and they'll be like, who is this Elle Woods of MIT? I was a little, and I know Ding, my husband is a PhD engineer. I love you all. I was nervous about that. And I think, both in the, diversity takes form in so many ways, like your life experience, your professional background, sectors, who would have thought I would have something to talk to with someone who ran an Air Force, in a major nation. And I think for me, what exceeded it is that you cannot replicate the power of, 40 something individuals and 20 countries in the classroom. And so, whether to Court's point, like, the parameters they shared, whether it's work experience or even the demographics he shared, like, those are just to give you a sense of what to expect. But I think for me, there was so much more that brought us together, so whether we were, marketing folks, finance folks, I think for me, what connected us is that we all chose this program because we were motivated to learn and work on ourselves. And I don't think there are many programs out there that really give you the space to work on yourself. It's really hard to work on yourself when you're in a really large cohort or you're rotated with different professors. I still go to Court and Molly and Elsbeth and Alex for advice. I'm still getting connections from them. And it's just, for me, like, the biggest surprising part of the cohort is that it doesn't stop at the classroom. Or even now, I know I'm not supposed to say what I'm doing now, but I'm in a different sector. And so there are folks I know in my cohort who have been in that sector. And so I can pick their brain and get advice from them. So I think what exceeded my expectations was I was surprised how motivated everyone was to learn. I thought there'd be a lot of folks who were sort of just there as a check on the box. And that just wasn't the case. Like, we all picked this program to learn and improve upon ourselves as leaders. And so I often say it was as much about unlearning as it was about learning. And I think for me, it was very clear that was the bar for everyone, whatever demographics they fall on, whether they're engineers, finance folks, marketing folks, CEOs, really whatever their background was.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. I know that for Court and I, being on this program is such a huge pleasure because there's a certain energy that comes from this cohort. I mean, it can be lonely at the top, and there's something powerful about not grappling with a big, complex challenge in a bubble. And so we just see the magic that happens when you get a lot of bright, interesting people who can actually focus on themselves and cut out a lot of the other noise. And we hope that was the experience for you, but that's kind of the experience we're trying to curate for people interested in our program. So I know you mentioned also when you were introducing yourself that being a mom and not wanting to step away from your daughter was a deciding element for you and why our program appealed. Do you feel that you were able to balance that a bit with the intensity of the program and the commute and all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, I will acknowledge that I am in like a position of privilege where I had a lot of planning and infrastructure and support from my partner to make it happen. So I will acknowledge that whatever your community support system looks like, partnered, unpartnered, kids, no kids, it's an investment, right? So I will acknowledge there was a lot of like just planning and preparation of like making sure that I could really, on the one hand, we want boundaries, but we want to make sure that when in the classroom with Court or Elsbeth, like, you're fully immersed and you're getting the most out of it. So I think for me, like, the family piece, I mean, it sounds like a very basic thing to think, but it's like the fact that you all ask the questions, like you ask the question of how do you feel, in my case, because I'm local, how do you feel about staying away versus not? Even like at graduation, my daughter, if you watch the recorded ceremony, you'll hear her. My daughter was there with me, like, losing it. And I think like there was like a Microsoft Surface in the exec ed building and different people in the program, like the program managers were like helping her draw on the Surface. And so I never, it can be really intimidating kind of blending and blurring the lines as an executive and as like, and I'll say parent broadly, it wasn't just moms. And I think what was amazing was like, you met us where we were. So like, whether it was like the needs of my daughter still plays with her Tim the Beaver that she got and she wants to go to MIT someday. So great job selling. Great lifetime value there if she goes to MIT. Sorry, that was a marketing joke for people who, but I think the other piece of it is that I loved that it was for all parents. So there were folks even who came from abroad who brought their families. And so, we got to know their kids and whether they would hang out with us on a social dinner, et cetera. So I love that everyone brought their whole selves to the program for sure. And that you all accommodated that and frankly welcomed that.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, good. I'm just noticing some questions in the comments section. And Courtney, I'm hoping we can try to address two at the same time. This is kind of MIT. We're trying to really push through here. One kind of question is, what are some of the entry criteria from Ernesto and Anith? And Courtney, if you could post the slide, I think it's the third or fourth from the beginning that shows what we generally look for. And then while you're doing that, Kriti, maybe you can answer the other kind of question from Kent, who said, what can you tell us, Kriti, about the amount of time that we can interact with other people and really get to understand what they're going through and share, be able to help each other about various issues. So if you could talk about that, I think the more factual questions we'll just leave up there. And then if people have questions about sort of the entry criteria, they can, again, continue to post those in the chat section. But
yeah. Well, first of all, congratulations, Ken. Very exciting. I think two aspects. I'll touch on formal and then informal. So formally in the classroom, again, menos y manos, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. It's not just a statement. So you will not have a choice. Like a lot of what you'll do is like small group work. So if you have done, a framework or gone through a certain framework or theme, you will put it in practice, whether it's being in Gen AI tools together, whether it's actually presenting business challenges you have or individual challenges you have, depending on what lens you take, right? Enterprise versus your own. So like, there are tons of opportunities to share. And like, because you're 40 people, also physically, like you will be in positions where you meet other people. So like, there are folks that maybe I got to know later in the program, right? And so I think like the program design is frankly brilliant of just, it creates the infrastructure such that you will put yourself in someone else's shoes and be able to kind of interact with them and react to their challenge. And again, like you would like having, again, I brought up the Air Force, like having someone from the Air Force leadership team. And it turned out we had a lot of similarities of like how we want to pivot and what we want to do. And so the perspective that he brought me and I brought him, like you just can't replicate that. So that's sort of the formal aspect. And then informally, Court is a masterful facilitator. So I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's lots of, without it being kind of this, oh, you have to like eat with everyone every day and you have to kind of be around them all the time, especially for some of my introverts on the call. There are ways in which you get to know each other and kind of break the ice throughout the program. And then I will say, and maybe I'm biased because I'm from the Boston area, there's so much to see here and so much to do in New England. And so what's great is there are a lot of communication channels. In fact, all of us still use a WhatsApp group. If you want, again, optional, you don't have to be. But there's a lot of just inviting folks. So I invited a bunch of folks to go play pickleball with me. A bunch of us went kayaking, and people brought their kids and families as well. So I think there's a lot of just informal stuff because everyone also wants to make the most of the New England and Boston experience as well. And at that time of year, the weather is beautiful. So there's just so much you can do in this area. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes.
There's another question in chat I'd love to call out to you, Kriti, from Felipe. He asks what the highlight of the course was, in your opinion.
So for me, I need to think about that. There's so many. Let me think for a second. I think the highlight of the course was that the course never ended. So what I mean by that is this is truly a community where I can continue to lean on. Like, I think, some of the skeptics out there might say, oh, well, like it's 4 or 5 weeks, like you'll do it and then you'll kind of go back and forget everything that you did. And the fact that, one of my classmates WhatsApped me yesterday, we're talking about some of our business challenges. We all wish each other on birthdays. Like, I remember like the college experience, when you have like lunch in the dining hall and those relationships that you cultivate and how you can't replicate it. And so to me, the highlight of the course is that it's the gift that keeps on giving. So whether it's like connecting to my cohort experience or broadly, I can talk about, I'm in healthcare now, Court giving me time on his family vacation to be like, hey, here's some amazing people you can chat with. Court knows everyone, just heads up. So I just think that like the fact that the professors or Elsbeth, one of the faculty directors, like giving me advice on potential professional opportunities and like making time. So like the fact that it's just a continual experience and it's not isolated to those 6 weeks is the highlight. Like to that question, Felipe, I'm not going to explain why this name tag has, I don't know if you can see it, all these things. This is on my desk every day. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's part of my experience. So the highlight is really that it continues, which might be maybe not the right answer, but that's what I could think of. But great question.
I think it's a great answer. All right, let's jump into. Did you have any key takeaways or any real light bulb moments while you were with us on campus?
Yes. So I know I talked a lot about individual aspect, but I've worked as an enterprise leader, like Procter and Gamble. Toast was also post IPO when I left. So I think there's like really three highlights. First is there's a book you all hear about, written by one of the professors, actually, Elizabeth Johnson, Step Up, Step Back, which is all about really what does it take, effectively, without ruining too much of the course. What made you successful up till this point will not make you successful in the future. And how do you really step up and lead by really driving your teams, whether it's your business unit or whether it's your CEO of a company, as Court said, to really painting the picture of what does success look like, what the outcome is, and the timeline and the parameters, and really allowing them to lead. And so I think a lot of us, if you think about menos and manos, it applies to sort of tinkerer, someone who's hands-on. And so I think the idea of like sometimes less is more, and how do you do that? And it's not just like a case study we read, we like practice it. In fact, like one of our classmates, I won't say their background exactly, but let's say they're very high up in a private bank. Like we'll literally be like, oh, I was in the blue zone this week and this is what I did and this is what I dealt with. And so we'll like keep using those frameworks. I think, how do you really step back? I'm an Indian mom. I'm a rescuer, right? I'm like, oh, that spilled. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and fix it. And really having the instincts to say, was that creating a dependency? What is that doing? And how do you really guide your teams forward and steer the ship as you kind of excel in your career? So I'd say that's one. Second is, I'm embarrassed to admit, even though I came to Massachusetts Institute of Technology, I had never used generative AI prior to joining AMP. I now use it every day, so much so that the paid plan told me I was using it too much 2 days ago when I was working on a research plan. So I think it's in the name, but like the access to technology and actually being able to practice it and the emerging technologies was just really cool. Subject matter kind of experience that you get in that class. And then finally, like I think Court is brilliant at helping you understand how to ask the right questions and really high quality questions. And I think I've just become a better leader by kind of asking better questions, which might sound like a very broad thing to say, but you do a lot without, again, revealing too much, a lot of practicing of how do you ask the right questions. And it all comes back to, again, stepping up and stepping back.
Cool. Thank you for that, Kriti. Let me step in here for a second, give Kriti a chance to sort of regather herself because she's been doing a lot of the work here. All been great. There was a question in here about, are there electives or is the program selected for you? And Kriti, maybe you'll have a comment about that. But when people come to this particular AMP, you're coming to things that Molly and I and the faculty have curated because we think these are the most appropriate things right now this year for the cohort that's coming. There are other ways to come to MIT for extended periods of time and take multiple courses. Where usually if you take a certain 25 days of executive education over 4 years, you can curate the program yourself and get something sort of similar that maybe is more personally appealing to you. But for the AMP, we're curating that experience and everyone is going through the same thing together. The only other thing that I would add is that if people have particular things that they're interested in that are quite narrow, but for example, we've had the COO of a shoe company come and say, I want to get leather out of my supply chain. Is anybody working on that at MIT? Well, we said, we don't know. That's kind of a narrow area of interest. Not everybody in the classes cares about that, but maybe we can find someone. And we did. It was amazing. Someone else wanted to get palm oil out of their food products. We found somebody that was working on that at MIT. So around the edges, there are ways to meet people, researchers, or maybe go to a lab and find out what people are working on in an area that you care about. So I think that was, who was asking about the the electives? I think it was, am I not remembering this?
Peter Wild.
Peter Wild, yes. So I just wanted to speak to that question for a second. And then Bernie asked about 5 weeks. How do people, I wasn't quite clear on your question, Bernie, but maybe what you were sort of asking is how do companies justify people being away for 5 weeks. And so there are a number of things that I would say to that. And Kriti, I see you nodding your head. Maybe you have a thought about that. One of the ways they do it is that people do bring real issues to work on while they're at the AMP, and they go home with a plan or a strategy or a set of initiatives that they've worked on while they've been with us at MIT. And the book that Kriti mentioned, Step Up, Step Back, helps on a lot of those kinds of things. The other is that very often companies that do send their folks away for 5 weeks do it because they want to make sure that the people that come are ready for the next big leap in a job. It's quite often a big step up from a level or two below the C-suite to the next job up. The complexity goes up, not in a linear way, but in a more logarithmic, exponential way. And so they're ready to invest that kind of time in getting people really prepared and grounded and, frankly, confident that they can handle the job. So those are the two main reasons that companies say, I'm willing to do this, in part because I'm hoping to get a deliverable back, a plan, and I want to get a more confident, broadened person who has a new network that's connected to MIT and a cohort. That's what I really am sending them away for 5 weeks for. Kriti, you were nodding your head before on these things.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. That's a really real question. And like, especially for some of our classmates who we're talking CEOs of massive corporations, like it was a big investment. And I think Court touched on everything. The only thing I'd add is two things, one more provocative and one more tactical. Tactically, we did have classmates who would keep their team engaged. So maybe like once a week, right? They might like send an email like, here's real time what we talked about on strategy, or hey, like go figure out how to do this thing on ChatGPT that we just did. And again, the power of Menos and Manos is that you can literally take some of the things that like Court and the team will have you go through. And in fact, some of our classmates have taken some of those exercises and brought it back. And I'm saying even to the working team, not just to the leadership. Saying that's like one very tactical. More provocatively, there were classmates who the first couple of weeks, this was a big concern. So it's a great question. And I think that's part of being a leader is like, can you step up and step back? And I think for some folks, it kind of helped them rethink, especially enterprise leaders, their priorities and who they're empowering, or frankly, what, if they have to be there, what do they need to work on in terms of dependencies? So it can be uncomfortable, I know, for some of our classmates at times, but I think there's learning in that discomfort. And then to Court's point, all of it will come back to the team in some way or the other, be it formal plans, but even informal practices, frameworks that the leader will bring back as well, or network as well.
Great.
So I know you've teased it a couple of times, but I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little about what leaving the program looked like for you, and what impact this has had personally, professionally for you.
Yeah, I know I've like mentioned a bunch of books, but if you haven't, check out the book Ikigai. It's very short, great read. So for me, I mentioned the kind of thematic questions of where do I want to spend my time and energy, and what role do I want to play? And I think I went into the program with a very strong hypothesis of what the answers to those questions would be. So even if it was, oh, I'm going to move into healthcare, it was like, okay, well, like I'll go find an early stage tech company, go maybe as like a fractional CMO or CXO, and kind of like basically do a lot of what I've been doing, but just move to a different sector, specifically again, maternal health, which is the area I was interested in. That was one avenue. The other avenue was frankly second guessing myself. Like, what are you thinking, Kriti? You should just like stay in the space you're in. Like, why, how are you going to move to healthcare, especially at the mid-senior level where I had no healthcare experience beyond my patient experience. And I think what the program did was kind of broaden my eyes and worldview of what am I capable of doing? And frankly, my classmates often being like, well, why can't you start something? Or why can't you work in nonprofit? And why can't you do those things? Just because, you did it once, you can do it again. You move from CPG to tech. And why can't you still learn and try new things? And so now what I'm doing is, even though I've always been someone who's been in, bigger companies or startups as an operator, for the first time in my career, I'm self-employed. So I'm often pinging my founder friends and my entrepreneur friends. I actually work in a major healthcare system. So I'm an executive advisor at Mass General Hospital. They have a Center for Women's Mental Health. So sort of doing in-house consulting on marketing, strategy, technology, squarely focused on reproductive mental health. So that's been an amazing experience to really work in the hospital system. I don't think without MIT, in fact, my boss knew about this program, so it helped. I don't know that this opportunity would have lended itself. And even thinking about the applications of technology in healthcare. So I spend time doing that. I've also joined the board of directors of the biggest nonprofit in this space. Again, never having had nonprofit experience, but just really deep in nonprofit governance and management now. And then doing my own projects. So actually starting to think about in the next 10 years, what might I do myself, which I don't think I would have had the courage without the cohort experience and frankly, some of the frameworks and ideas that came out of this program. So that's me now, thinking deeply about pregnant and postpartum people all day, every day.
Someone has to.
Yeah.
So just to jump back to kind of the experience, what did you have to do to prepare for your time at MIT? I know you talked about being a planner, but what went into that for you?
So I do think, obviously Court and Molly and Alex and team are like very open and flexible, but like, this is your time to be fully immersed. So to the last question, like, these are 5 weeks where like, we need you to be involved. So I think like getting the syllabus, walking with my husband through kind of expectations, childcare management, what would happen, and having a really intentional, I know some of my classmates, like I said, chose to bring their families, or maybe their families would come for a weekend, if they could do it in their life circumstances, and like, how would they make them part of it? So it doesn't feel like, oh, we're just, it says it's 5 weeks away from work. It's 5 weeks away potentially from your community, right? So I think that was one aspect. I think the other aspect that I actually loved was we actually had some like Zoom sessions prior to the program and some pre-read. So the power, but also the challenge for our program folks here is that because they want to bring a really diverse cohort, not everyone has the same baseline, right? So like my baseline on marketing customer experience is going to be very different than like my capital markets understanding than like someone who runs a bank, right? Like I am not going to understand capital markets nearly as well as someone who runs a major bank. They're not going to understand customer experience. So I think the pre-work is nice because you have these Zoom sessions that sort of equalizes a lot of the playing field to begin. And for people who are introverts, extroverts, or even have a language barrier, some folks that might not be, even if they're fluent, to Court's point, there's cultural nuances to how you communicate, right? And so I think it also gave us an opportunity to sort of get to know each other a little bit before we were all sitting in a classroom together. So I think there was sort of the formal preparation that honestly you all did. So I would say like some people like may not attend, like make the time to attend those. And they're also recorded if for some reason you can't. And then doing the formal preparation of life. And then again, in my case, I left my job, but I do think for my peers, there was a lot of kind of the while I'm out, who's the decision maker, how do we kind of game plan to the question we had previously?
I got a smile out of Stanley's question about asking ChatGPT which were the best AMPs to go to. And the answer came back that MIT was. And I just want to remind Stanley that there's bias in every artificial intelligence. Okay, but I kind of like this bias. But so anyway, but I know that you have thoughts about why this was a better fit for you, Kriti. And so before you talk about that, I'm hoping you will talk about that. I just wanted to point out to Stanley that if you really are trying to transition into life sciences, that's one of the very strong threads of the area around MIT. Part of the ecosystem here is all the biotech, large pharma is here. Basically, all of the 5 key stakeholders for a thriving innovation ecosystem are right outside my window here. We have big companies, in the case of pharma, big biotech, Genentech is here. They're all here, and they're here in part to connect with talent, to connect with labs, all that kind of thing. We can show you this picture of sort of the ecosystem around us. So, but biotech isn't the only story about MIT. There's all the software companies, Apple, Facebook. They're all the people that you might associate with the West Coast are also here with us. And there's a strong finance and fintech sector here. It's a big energy sector. So Shell TechWorks is here and doing advanced stuff about energy. So it's just a thriving place. And someone else asked, do we go out and meet CEOs? And the answer to that is mostly no, because their time is crazy and hard to get them scheduled. We might run into a couple of CEOs of a smaller company. So we do go to see companies, and we do go to see labs, and we do go to see people who are actually trying to work on some of the problems that we talk about in the classroom. So they're not always CEOs, though, or in the C-suite. They're people who are running big parts of an operation. I'm thinking about the Broad Institute, for example, which is has a big clinical business where people send them human tissue. They do the analysis of the DNA and say, here's a way to do personalized medicine, for example. So we go talk to the people that are running that operation for them. So this is a really interesting place to try to think about different sectors, and we can help you get out into those sectors. But I went on a little bit longer there than I meant to, Kriti. Do you want to talk about, you did look at a variety of options, but you chose MIT, even though you had sort of a liberal artsy kind of college background.
Yeah, and I went to Harvard for undergrad, so like, you know, I no, I think there's a couple things. Maybe less so of why I chose Core, but more of like why I think it is ChatGPT is correct. Which is something I didn't touch on, which, you know, I didn't know that much about the Sloan School, I'll be very honest, but as I've gotten to know professors is because of the menos and monos, one thing I haven't touched on is like the caliber of the professors. And also any professor who chooses to teach in Court and Molly's program is like choosing to teach, right? Like beyond their, whatever their day job is, teaching or research. And a lot of the folks have applied or industry experience. So they're not just sort of like academics in an ivory tower, like some might be in some other schools. They really do kind of work and collaborate with some of these companies that you heard Court mention, and they're subject matter experts. So when you think about AI, you know, like one of the professors, Renee Gosselin, like she's like preeminent expert in like AI ethics and the intersection of CX and AI. So like, you know, a lot of the initial thought leadership around these topics, even frankly, before these emerging technologies existed, were literally here, and you just can't replicate that. Whether it's replicating that initial subject matter expertise, or I think the brilliance of, because they have that industry expertise, many of them, I think it just kind of makes it much more transferable, whether you're someone in life sciences as a physician, or whether you're like in marketing like me. So I just think that there's a power to that. And again, you just practice it. So just being able to practice it is also great. So that you're not just kind of learning it on a piece of paper. You're really in the tool and practicing the tool.
So as I'm sure you've experienced, 5 weeks seems like a really long time when you're planning to be out of office, planning to be away from home a good chunk of the time, but it really flies by when you're in the classroom. Hopefully there are some people who are joining us today who may end up with us in the classroom this June. And I'm wondering if there's any advice that you could give them for making the most of their experience while they're with us.
One is like taken directly from Court. I think it might have been the first slide he showed us on the first Zoom session, and maybe the last slide on the last day, which is embrace the foggy road, which might sound a little like cheesy, but it's actually really powerful, which is like, you know, there is a level of vulnerability that it requires to put yourself in that learning environment, expose yourself to so many different ways of thinking, so many new things, right? And so the advice I would have is like, really it's Court's advice, which is like, embrace that. And while I think you should, you know, I think anyone should have a really good answer of why they want to invest this time at this point in their career or for their company, know that the answer to that might change. So I think like the advice I would give is like, be really clear on what questions you have, like kind of where we started this conversation, like what are the questions you want to ask, and really delve deep into, again, be the individual, be the enterprise level, personal, professional in this program. but be ready for that answer to evolve and change just by virtue of like the level of diversity of experience and learning you're going to have in the classroom, which might sound a little philosophical, but I think that is like the biggest thing. And I think the other aspect of it is, I don't know if the right word is like check your ego at the door, but like, because we're such a small cohort, no one cares like what your pedigree and what your, I mean, obviously like the people admitting you care, but once you're there, like no one's going to be sitting there and be like, well, Kriti, like, do you have this many years of experience? And do you have this, you know, pedigree? And did you like, I did see in the first couple of days where some people were like, this is my P&L and I managed this many $1 billion and this many $1 million. And like, while that might be like part of what I think equips you to really, to Court's point, bring experience and ideas to the classroom, I think like checking that at the door. And when you're in that door, we're all classmates with this like cheesy little name tag. So that's sort of my 2 pieces of advice is just like, know what you want to get out of it, be open to the answer changing, and check your ego at the door and your job description at the door, and just be willing to kind of roll up your sleeves and be surprised by what you might find.
That was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
There were a couple of things you mentioned in there that I know some questions have come up in the chat about selection criteria, about whether people are suited for the program. Kriti's mentioned it a couple of times, the diversity of experience, of background. Court's mentioned it a couple of times. We do have a list, but we don't want you to count yourself out if you don't clearly fall into each and every one of those criteria. At the end of the day, what we want is, you know, interesting people who are grappling with big, complex challenges, who can bring those with them to the classroom to enrich the conversation. So if you're at the cusp of the number of years experience, if you maybe don't have as much international exposure as you'd like, you're always welcome to reach out directly to me, to our program team, and schedule a time to talk. I know Kriti and I met on campus, I believe, before you formally submitted your application, because we're happy to help you, you know, work through, is there value in this program for you? Is this the thing that's going to help you, you know, with the challenges you're facing right now? Because all of the programs that we have at Executive Education, we are designing them to be impactful for our participants. And so if you're the right fit for our program, we want you there. And if you're not, we're happy to help you find something that is right for you. But just an open invitation to not count yourself out and to reach out if this program, if you feel drawn to it, but you might not categorically meet our program criteria.
I'm glad you said that, Molly. I'm looking at the time, and I'm just thinking that it might be good for us to just say a couple of other things. One is that the course is organized around the process of developing a strategy. So we basically think about, well, what's happening in the outside world? What are you trying to get done? And so that's the early part of the course, but we work basically through the development of a strategy. What capabilities will you need in the future? How will you have difficult conversations with some of the people on your team? Those kinds of things. And then how can you future-proof your strategy? So that's how the course is structured over 5 weeks. That's the basic framework. And Court, I'm hoping that you can post the second to last slide that shows the takeaways, just so that we can leave that up there and see if there's any questions that come up about, well, what else do people get beyond what Kriti and Molly and I have been talking about? And so there on the screen, you can see some of the main takeaways. Some are about the connection and the network that's ongoing, as Kriti said. Some are about content. Some are about things like certificates. Some are about connections to within MIT. And so just wanted to leave those there and say that we'd be glad to talk with any of you if you're thinking about, do I fit or not? You're kind of torn about it. We do this all the time, and you don't have to come here live. So yes, Kriti lives locally, and we were able to see her on campus. But we also talk a lot, most of the time anyway, to people on Zoom. So let me pause there and see if any other questions are coming up or anything that you wanted to say about the takeaways, Kriti.
No, I think you all did a great job. I just forgot like one very minor thing, but it's actually really important, which is in the spirit of the continual, when you see the lifelong connections bullet, there's actually an AMP or AMP reunion that happens every year with cohorts across time. And in fact, it's built into the syllabus. Syllabus. Yeah, that was embarrassing. Let's cut that from the recording.
I use that all the time. You don't.
They're like, they got a low bar. She doesn't know her syllabus is syllabus. No, I'm sorry. Now I'm like going out of it. But in all seriousness, the reunion is part of the syllabus. And so you get to connect with folks from, 10 years ago to, our cohort to a few years ago. So that would be the only other thing, is that highlight hasn't happened yet. But that's a really cool experience that you actually get to continue to have an opportunity to connect on campus. And it's not just networking, like they'll actually introduce some of the latest frameworks, principles, technology. So that's also part of the continual education. That's exciting.
Yeah. In that regard too, some of the people have started their own companies, and they often are on a panel at that alumni session and talk about what they've done with their companies since they came to AMP. So that's one of the ways people meet senior executives who have shared some of the experience that you're going through as a member of the cohort.
It looks like we're just a couple of minutes out from the hour if anyone wants to sneak in one last question, but we can also take questions via email. If you have an email, we can put the address up on the screen. So you can send it to us with any questions. And on our website, you can also find more information on the advanced management program and also how to apply. And like Molly said, don't count yourself out. Don't just think that you're not a good fit because you don't fit certain categories. So we'd love to see that you visit the website if you have any more questions. The round 3 deadline is coming up. It's in April. So it's April 11th in 2025. And I think that conversation was just awesome. So basically, Court knows everyone, right? And Kriti says that the best part about AMP is that it never ends. And that's awesome. I love that too. Unfortunately, our LinkedIn Live shows do have an end. And I wanted to thank everyone for tuning in to our LinkedIn Live event for the past hour with MIT Sloan Exec Ed. That conversation was awesome. And again, we just want to remind you that the AMP dates taking place on campus this summer. So mark this in your calendar. It's going to be May 27th to June 26th, 2025. And like I said, that round 3 deadline is April 11th. You can learn more on our website. And thank you again so much to Molly and Court for sharing your knowledge about the program with us. And thank you so much, Kriti, for taking the time to share your MIT experience with us. And with that, thank you everyone else for joining us for the last hour.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.